Hello, thank you for joining me today. My name is Ben Wells. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer of PTI Digital. I'd like to talk to you today a little bit about the COVID crisis and asking whether it will force sport finally to adapt to the digital age. Before we go too much further, I'd like to start with a quote. It's one you may have seen, but I think it's one that's particularly apposite for our industry at this time. For me, sport has always been slow, exceptionally slow, to understand what digital is and what it could mean for our industry and for our businesses. Not just the challenges, but also the opportunities. We've been wedded for too long, in my view, to an outdated commercial model, which has been shown up during these times of no matches to be wholly inelastic and not fit for purpose. COVID is very much the tide, the receding tide, which has shown that to be the case. We'll come back to this quote. So what is the digital age? Well, for me, it's summed up perfectly here by these two charts. The one on the left shows the market capitalization of the world's top 10 companies in 2009. And on the right, it's the same top 10 group, but 10 years later on. What you'll see here are two key things. Firstly, in 2009, the top 10 companies were made up of the traditional mix of financial services, pharmaceutical, retail, and energy companies. Only one tech company in there, Microsoft. 10 years later, 2019, 7 of the top 10 companies are technology companies. The other thing which I think is fascinating is looking at the sheer scale of those companies. The biggest company in 2009, PetroChina, would only just have made the top 10 years later on. These technology companies have one thing in common. They are all underpinned by data. Data enables scalable, exponential growth, and this is a trend which is only going to continue. So what is the impact of digital around us? It's not just the biggest companies in the world that have been disrupted. Everything around us, everything that we spend our time and money on is changing. We can see now that sports clubs have a lot more competition for people's time and money, video on demand, gaming, streaming services, social media. There's been an enormous shift at a macro level in how brands spend their money. 54% of revenue now spent on marketing globally goes onto the digital platforms we talked about on the last slide. The way content is delivered to us has been disrupted. If you look at music as an industry, for example, it's been disrupted twice in just 15 years. From packaged goods like CDs through to downloads and then streaming services. We'd be daft to think it's not going to happen in sport. And technology, both legal and illegal, has sated the demand for short form content. It's not just about technology, this is about changing human behavior. And the fact that we don't want to watch full 90 minutes or 80 minutes of a game of sport these days, we can actually do that now through clip rights and other methods. And the reality is that the impact of all these things is much more pronounced the younger the audience is. And when you look at some of the stats here at the top of the page, we know as an industry we need to engage with younger people. It's going one way and we feel very much stuck in another way. It's always felt to me a little bit like the digital revolution is something that just doesn't apply to sport. We have a failing commercial model, and it feels in the context of everything going on around us, it's getting left ever further behind. So what is that traditional model? I've used an image here of Sisyphus from Greek legend, who unfortunately was doomed to wake up every morning and have to push this enormous rock to the top of a mountain. When he got to the top, unfortunately, he fell asleep and he woke up again at the bottom, and he had to repeat his task for all eternity. It feels very much like our model in sport. Even pre-COVID, the model was finite, totally inelastic. It was limited by inventory, such as tickets and hospitality places, and subject to price sensitivities. And I think we all know that given the impact that COVID has had on people, price sensitivity is going to be an even bigger issue post-COVID. It's limited by new product development. There's not a huge amount of innovation in that space. We don't have the time for it. And most clubs operate in a cycle of season to season, match to match, week to week. We come in from the high of a game at the weekend, coming on a Monday morning, and what are we doing? We're doing the same thing we did last Monday. Same thing happens in July. We get to the end of the season, we review what's happened, and we start again. The reality is that we just do not have enough bandwidth in our businesses to stop and pause and think, are we doing things right? Is this the smartest way to do it? Additionally, marketing is not seen as a long-term strategic commercial driver. It's merely a sales support function. There's no link between spend and return. And as a consequence, there's very little equity being built for the most part in clubs' brands or in their customer relationships. In short, people work very, very hard. I know that. I've worked club side for a number of years. But every Monday we come back in and we're starting from the same place, just like our good friend Sisyphus here. This model is, in my view, no longer fit for purpose and desperately needs disrupting. I'd like to talk a little bit about sponsorship specifically, because again, I think it's an area which needs innovation. For me, in sport, it's been bought and sold too often very badly. It's sold as a proxy for advertising and unfortunately doesn't understand the full power that a beautifully strategized, beautifully conceived and beautifully executed sponsorship can deliver for everyone. In sport, media value remains the key driver, but media is just a commodity to be bought at the lowest price. Sponsorship is limited by product category exclusivity. We have this mantra that you can only have one brand in a sector as a sponsor, but it's also limited by inventory. At some point, we are going to run out of sites to stick a logo on. And as brand spend has shifted, as I mentioned, to hyper-targeted digital platforms, traditional sponsorship feels like it's been left ever further behind. I've already talked about clubs not investing into their brand, to their brand story or their customer relationships. So as a consequence, there's little differentiation between the propositions. If someone can buy the same media value up the road for half the price, they're going to go there. There's no loyalty to the club because there's nothing unique about what a lot of clubs are selling. And the consequence is it's become a race to the bottom and no one wants to win that race. Sponsorship is just seen as a revenue vertical. It's not linked to the club's strategic objectives. It's not adding any value over and above the pure revenue. And to be quite honest, one sponsor could be interchangeable with another. There's no loyalty then built up with the customer base. There's no value created either for the club, the supporters, or the brand. And the result is a huge churn in that sector. A good example here is thinking about the betting sector. We've talked already about the fact that clubs need to engage with much younger audiences, but when your main sponsor is a brand that legally cannot do so, then the left hand is not helping the right hand out. So moving on to COVID, well, the tide unfortunately has well and truly gone out. No matches, no ticketing, no hospitality, no F&B, limited retail, no income. Sponsorship survived for now, but there's a long tail in the corporate market. And many sponsors, I think, when they get to the end of their contracts, will not be able to renew, whether they want to or they don't, simply because they've been hit so hard by COVID. And with so many propositions likely to be in the market at the same time, supply is going to outstrip demand, and we will see that race to the bottom. At a more macro level, there are uncertainties in the broadcast market. Even the big broadcasters have been hit badly by this. And we have to assume that for the majority of us, there's going to be deflationary pressure on sports rights in the next few years. Many clubs, sadly, have mortgaged either existing or future income and other assets they have simply to survive. That's not a sustainable model. And even when fans are allowed back in, we just have no idea how many will want to, or how many others have found opportunities to spend their time and money elsewhere, whether on digital or other platforms. It is a pretty bleak picture. I think we all know that, but I'm here to say today, don't abandon all hope. There is a way forward. It's one that I believe firmly should have been adopted 5 or maybe even 10 years ago, but it's one that's going to require a substantial mindset shift. Even if things do return to near normal, the COVID crisis represents a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for our industry to right the wrongs of what was already a poor commercial model. It was already broken, totally unscalable, as I said, highly leveraged and atrophying naturally as fan bases aged. You might have spotted a stat on an earlier slide. I didn't refer to it, but the reality is that the week outside of 2 hours of match time represents 99% of the time that we have, yet we focus on those 2 hours. Everything is a build up to that. We need to flip our model and think about how those 2 hours, when we have the maximum exposure, can be a platform for accelerating, rewarding, redeeming, and promoting everything that goes on throughout the week. The emphasis now has got to switch firmly from the previous model of yield management into one where we are creating new value, not just for ourselves, but for brands. That engagement creates data opportunities. What is your plan for those people when they come in? It's not about selling them a ticket. It's about understanding who they are, what they want, what their aspirations are, and how we can start thinking about new product development to service those needs. Think about your sponsors. How would they be excited by the fact that you've now engaged with a whole number of other people? They may never come to a game, but it doesn't matter. These people still want to buy their products. Think about how you can invest in your brand. What is unique about you? What stories can you tell? What USPs do you have that someone cannot buy somewhere else? Avoid that race to the bottom. Avoid the commoditization of your brand. We have to be realistic. The number one priority at the moment for everyone is survival of this awful pandemic. But number two priority, following very, very closely behind, has got to be a resolution not to emerge from this crisis with more of the same. This is, as I say, a once in a lifetime opportunity for us to say, let's reset our commercial model. We cannot assume that COVID is ever going to go away. And if we were to have another wave or a similar pandemic like this, it would be absolutely criminal if we didn't learn the lessons that it's taught us to totally reskin our commercial model. I'm afraid there's no silver bullet. There isn't a quick fix on this. We all like quick fixes, but there isn't one. It's going to require a lot of thought, a lot of hard work, and being comfortable with failing, but failing fast and learning fast. We have to flip our models from a match day model to one which is about 365-day a year engagement with people. It's time, in short, to enter the digital age. If we're not going to do it now, then when? Thank you for listening today. My name is Ben Wells. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at PTI Digital, and we're here to help. Please feel free to get in touch anytime. Thank you.